So just the four of us so far.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to our very first panel interview. Tonight, I'm going to have the pleasure of interviewing our three wonderful guests. I'm Elena. I am the content and social media marketer at Start, and tonight we'll be having Brad Cook, who is the VP of Global Talent Acquisition at Intuitive, Gerry Crispin, who is the principal and co-founder at CareerX Road, and Atta Tarki, CEO and Managing Director at ECA. Welcome, everyone. Nice to meet you, Brad, and nice to see you again, Atta and Gerry.
Thanks for having us.
Sorry?
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. So for obvious reasons, this webinar is going to be hosted from home. And it's exactly for the same reason, actually, that we're all connected right now. So it all started from a post that we saw from Brad Cook on LinkedIn, which was about repurposing TA. And then we started thinking about other subjects that we could ask some specialists about. And for instance, we wanted to talk about the current situation with layoffs and hiring freeze, which is happening in some companies and apparently not in others. So we wanted to ask, first of all, Atta Tarki, what is his opinion on this? If there is a winning strategy, if companies should not do hiring freezes or layoffs at all, and also what the situation is going to look like in the near future.
Yeah, thanks for having I think we're uncharted territories. When we're looking at a lot of companies, the situation is changing by week or by even day sometimes in some instances. And it would be irresponsible for some companies to not be thinking about layoffs, hiring freezes, or furloughs as a way to kind of like survive. Now you have the payroll protection program that came out for small businesses and rolled out this week here in the US. And we've applied for it as a business ourselves. And we'll take a few weeks to see how that's going to come true. But I think that you have to kind of like look at all options possible in order to kind of like be able to sustain accounts. One consideration I would say is instead of kind of like just with layoffs right away, I co-authored an HBR piece that talked about what are some of the other options you could be looking at first. And one of the pieces of that is to also start asking the team members what they want to do. Your staff, what options they prefer. And a lot of leaders I talk to, they say, well, I can't do that. That's for anxiety and frustration on staff members. But our experience has been the opposite. Our experience has been team members part of that discussion. What we do is to be open with the team members. In order for us to sustain this economic environment, we need to cut by X%. We've looked at all the non-personnel related costs, and we were able to get to 8% of that, 60% of that, whatever it is that we need to cut costs with. How would you like to handle the rest? And there are a number of options out there you could look at. Give people that option to pick between those things. The CEO or the leadership team can still make that final decision, but being influenced by the choices that your team members make is important in this very difficult scenario. And some of the choices are, well, do you still think we should be contributing 401k plans, retirement plans, or do you want us to minimize layoffs instead? Are you okay with going down to a 4-day work week? Are you okay with going down to a 3-day work week? Are you okay with taking a pay cut on top of that, even if we also are reducing our work hours? Is anyone willing to take a sabbatical in this environment? And we've seen people are willing to take sabbaticals in this environment, even if you would think they're not. Are there folks who are willing to resign voluntarily, and as soon as the economy picks up, you'll be prioritized in terms of rehires if you're doing that, so that you can collect unemployment benefits during that time, and then we'll do it. And I also want to mention that a lot of states in the US, if you're going down on your number of hours, so let's say you're going down to a 4-day work week, the workers are eligible to get unemployment benefits on the 20% reduction in salary that they're taking, if that's the program that you choose. I just talked a lot. Go ahead, Elena.
Oh, it's all right. We actually wanted to ask you one last thing before we move on to our next guest. And it's concerning this GIF that we've all seen, or most of us at least, I guess. And that's showing quite a scary trend. We're going to show it to you in a second. In the meantime, I'm going to tell you, well, let's look at the GIF now. Sorry. Right. So, Atta, do you have any comments concerning this? Is there anything that you want to say about this? Because you had some really interesting data about unemployment rates during the previous recession we had. And so, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and what this GIF is showing is that the number of unemployment claims is rising really rapidly. And I think the last data point in that is that it was up to $3 million. Gerry was telling us earlier today that that number is now up to $20 million, if that's correct, Gerry. So tons of people filing for unemployment and people laying off those employees. If we look back at the 2008 financial crisis, in the midst of that, when unemployment levels for folks lacking high school education was about 18%. Unemployment rates for people who were college educated did not surpass 5 percentage points. And what that tells me is that the war for talent, for highly sought after talent, will continue, even in this environment. I was talking to Google yesterday, and this is not a secret, it's public information. They're still hiring 12,000 people for their division that's going to be competing with Amazon Web Services. And there are tons of companies that are still kind of like continuing their hiring in this environment. And I think that kind of like keeping that in mind and knowing that kind of like, yes, you might be going through a rough patch right now, but you still want to make sure that you're able to retain your star performers, your star talent, and that war for talent is going to keep going on in the next few months and the next few years is important.
So, well, we're talking about a market that, in your opinion, is still going to be a candidates market after this crisis. And one note for the audience, I'm sure you're going to come up with very interesting questions as we go along. I forgot to mention it earlier, my apologies. On the upper right corner of the screen, there is a red button called Ask Question. You can ask your questions there, and we're going to read them at the very end of the webinar, and our guests are going to answer your queries. So going back to this, yeah, in a word, do you think this is going to be a candidates market or an employers market after the recession?
I think that for strong performers and star talent, it always is a candidates market. The partnership between the employer and the great talent. And if it's not a partnership, you're not going to get productivity out of that person. And it needs mutually respectful partnership there. And just because employers are getting a few more applicants right now than before, my strong advice to them is to show your true colors when it counts the most, because candidates will remember that. And what you want to avoid is that you use this scenario to build a team of mercenaries, because as soon as kind of like the economy turns, those mercenaries will be gone. But stay focused on building a team of still missionaries, even if you're getting tons of applicants, and pay close attention to the missionaries that are your star talent.
All right. Brett, do you have any opinions about this? What do you think about the current situation and its evolution in the near future?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is every industry is being affected differently. So there really isn't one silver bullet that fixes them all, or no one ring that controls all the rings. So I think you have to take every industry at its own. High tech, a lot of people are still looking for that great talent. And my original post was something that an old boss said to me many years ago that come from manufacturing. Is during a slowdown, if you're allowed to, if the company is in a position where you can keep your staff, well, what do you do with the idle hands? And that's where that sort of triggered from. So, from what we're looking at, and this has been done quite a few times, is how do you prepare yourself for tomorrow? Because we don't know if this is a month, 2 months, 6 months, 12 months, no one really knows what it is. I would like to be thinking through the world of rose-colored glasses that we can come out of this quickly. So, preparing for the talent, building the infrastructure that you have right now, using the downtime to, take the things off that have been band-aids, that have just been stopping you from moving forward fast. Fix those business processes. Fix your business processes that give you the right data to make the right decisions. If you've got an environment where you can't rely on a consistent process, maybe go back and start with that. Start with a consistent process that you all can agree to. Now the time we can train everybody, you can find some power users to teach the others because everyone has some time. The little bit of work at the beginning gives a lot of benefit at the other end when it comes to metrics and those sort of things. There's different platforms out there with LinkedIn and Intello, and wherever you're finding talent today, knowing who that talent that you would normally go after in a competitive market is more important than ever. That you start knowing who they are, start outreaching who they are today, and it comes back to what Atta said before. When this all turns around and we go back into a big hiring market, people will remember little things big things like candidate experience. The CX that we go through now as a company is more important than ever because people will have very, very long memories of who treated them respectfully in a really difficult time. And who didn't. So there's no right or wrong answer, but I just go back to, if you're in an environment where it takes you a good 2 to 3 months to ramp up good recruiters, then bring them on and get them ramped up for the company, it probably takes most companies to get a fully functional recruiter a good 3 to 6 months where they're really hitting their stride. We as a company think we're going to come out of this in 3 to 6 months, and we may not be back at 100%, but we'll be back at something. Well, then we want to be ready to be able to ramp again. If we've just got rid of all the staff and have to start from scratch, that doesn't make sense. From a business perspective, not every industry is going to be able to do that. So I'm feeling lucky that I'm in an environment we can do that. That's sort of the plan of how to move this forward.
Okay, and now I'm curious to hear Gerry's opinion on this matter.
Well, I think everybody, I think both Brad and Atta set a great stage, in terms of some of the issues. There are, I think, a number of differences that I see between this and anything else. Obviously, some of it is scale, and that GIF was unbelievable from a scale point of view. In the United States alone, we probably are 20 million people out of work at the moment. But every country, Brad mentioned industry, but it's also countries are doing different things that each of us needs to adapt to in terms of how we can manage our workforce, either in terms of bringing them back, keeping them at work, helping them to do something. So, for example, in the United States, there's a special direct fund, if you will, for airlines that will allow them to keep their workers literally through September. And if they do, then the issue is, okay, they're not going to be flying airplanes. How many of them can I actually help me to think about what we could do differently when everything changes, so that we come back faster, that our recruiters are able to build pipelines, so we have plenty of opportunity to deal with that. And so one of the differences between this and some years ago, at least one of the recessions that I've been through, is that we may have more resources for those companies that are furloughing workers to bring them to have them help us or work with us in a variety of different ways. And when we even when we let people go and say they're furloughed, implicit in that, unlike almost any other recession I've seen, is that I want them back. And implicit on the people who might hire them is that I need to walk these people back after this is done, potentially. And so that's a little bit more collaborative than a talent war. So it may impact other industries more so than it does those that are desperately competitive in terms of those issues. And so I think it's certainly in the IT industry, there's going to be a lot more effort to keep them working at home, and with other industries, we may be working just to make sure that they're taken care of. We're going to increase our communication to them. We're going to do an awful lot of different kinds of things that will help maintain that relationship that we had with them as solid employees, so that when the time comes that they can come back, they will.
Yeah. Very interesting indeed. Now, to the root of it all, there was this post, as I mentioned earlier, that Brad Cook shared on LinkedIn that was the spark that ignited this conversation. And it was about repurposing your talent acquisition team during such a challenging time as this one. And so I'm going to ask Brad, how do you think that's possibly done? What's the best way for a company to repurpose their TA team? Are there any specific pieces of advice that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, I can, but it all really depends on what you have inside, what you have as infrastructure within your company. If you're an organization that really has your IT or your TA tech stack really dialed in, it is much easier. I'm not in one of those environments right now. If I was in a previous environment, it would have been much easier for me. So at the moment, I'm trying to piece things together. So what I would pose the challenge to everybody is to think creatively. And for me, I've always been a data guy. Capture the data once and use it many times. Now, it could be as simply as all your recruiters and sources have LinkedIn project folders, or wherever they're hoarding the talent that they know they want to go, then find out where that is and get everybody organized of where their talent is. Then there's tools out there and that makes it easy for people to extract that data and get it into a core system. If you have a CRM, you can drop it into a CRM. If you have a CRM, you're then able to think about how do you dissect the talent into talent communities or into buckets of specialty. Now, when you have those buckets of specialty, you now have the ability to do outreach. If you don't have a recruiting marketing activity, well, if you've got a database, or even if you don't have a database, if someone's technical enough, you could literally use Microsoft Access, extract data into spreadsheets, drop it into a database. As long as you've got an email, you could now export that into Constant Contact or MailChimp or some sort of outbound communication mechanism where you can now communicate to that talent that you deemed critical to your business today or in the future. So that's where I think the outreach, for me, it's all about attraction, and attraction now more so than ever, of how do we attract people that may not have known about the company now in preparation before. If we can convert 10% of those to now working for the company, that's 10% more than if we did nothing. So simple little things like that of pooling your information, your contacts into one place. One big thing that I still see a lot of companies, and a lot of it is because the tools that we have within our ATSs don't make it easy, but how do you mine the data that you already have? If you're always going outside of the company, outside of the four walls, to LinkedIn and all these other external sourcing tools, you're not necessarily mining the database that you have within the four walls. You know, if you've had hundreds of thousands of candidates apply to jobs and you can see which ones have gone through an interview, well, maybe start running reports to see all of those candidates that have got it to a second or third interview. They could become silver medalists. Those people did really great in the interview cycle. You want to get in front of those folks. So, I could go on for a while at different types of things, but even if you don't have the infrastructure, because some people know I've always had pretty great technology, you don't have to have great technology. You can do things pretty simply and pretty cheaply just by getting creative.
Okay. Someone else who has a bit of experience and is especially interested in data is Atta. So I'm going to pass the mic to him and ask him what his opinion is on the matter of repurposing talent acquisition teams these days.
Absolutely. This is the time to get creative and try to kind of like apply more customized solutions as opposed to kind of like trying to paint with a broad brush. If you look at the folks within your talent acquisition team and HR teams, these are individuals that are as colorful as any other department within your company, and they come with a variety of skill sets. And organizations that take the time to learn what each of these individuals bring to the table and what are some of our current needs will come ahead when things start picking up again. So I would say start by understanding what are our things that we could be catching up on now that we have some time to catch up on all these special projects. What are some of our other needs? How can we, what are the skills we need? And then go out to your talent acquisition teams and HR teams and ask them how well their skill sets and interests align with those needs. Because you'll have folks that have a lot of different skill sets. We internally have a person from our talent acquisition team who's phenomenal at graphical design. And he's taking the time to kind of like update a lot of the graphical images on our websites and social media and things like that. Another person had shown interest in updating our social media profiles and sites and presence. And guess what? This is an opportunity to catch up with the new world order. I was one of those folks who used to kind of like make fun of the millennials for connecting with their buddies over Snapchat and Instagram. Guess what? Now we all are doing that, right? And that's going to be the new world order for some time. So allowing our talent acquisition person to take the lead to update our social media presence is great. And she's phenomenal at that. Other folks are helping us get our ducks in a row when it comes to how we're going to kind of like come out of this kind of like downturn with our foot on the gas pedal as opposed to on the brake. By preparing lists of potential companies and contacts within those companies that we can reach out to as soon as we're starting to see positive signs in the economy again. And kind of like making sure that we're all ready to get going when that hits. But it's not a one solution there. It's many, many different solutions that we're trying to come up with based on the skill sets and interests of folks. And taking that approach has allowed us to repurpose a lot of our folks.
Very interesting. And now, Gerry, I'm sure you have an opinion on this one as well. So
I have opinions on everything. It's just okay, you know. An observation though, in being able to listen to both Brad and Atta, you know, obviously data is going to be a critical issue no matter what. And it's then the question is, where do you collect that data? And in both the answers to the first two questions, Atta pointed out that one of the first things you want to do is talk to the people who are most impacted. I think that's a very critical set of issues. We often make decisions in the absence of the people who are most impacted by the decisions we make. And so when you think about who are the stakeholders in our process for recruiting, we should be making sure that we are collecting data from the business leaders, from the hiring managers, from the candidates themselves to the degree that we can. And in the case of recruiters who might otherwise be furloughed or laid off, but we're thinking about how could we build a business case we should be talking about what they think their skills are, capabilities are, and whether they have any insights about things that they would like to do. And then yes, be creative and customize in relation to that. What's happening for those few firms that are able to do that more is setting up, pipelining. As an example, I was talking to some healthcare systems that had converted a number of their coordinators to actually doing cold calling of alumni of the hospital system to see if they had an interest in volunteering or coming back because they had needs. So there's interests around that. The companies that have furloughed workers and clearly want to bring all those workers back in 2, 3, 4 months down the road are going to have to figure out a whole new approach to communicating with them in an ongoing way so that you keep them warm a little bit. Let them know what's going on. And what better group to do that than a bunch of recruiters who could give a personal touch to a lot of the automated approaches that we have for communicating to folks out there. So especially the critical ones, the folks that we know are the best performers who by and large we've loaned somewhere else. We want them back, and somebody should be keeping in touch with them. And it's the hiring managers are also gone, so there's a lot of opportunity to be creative like that. And if you are going to let people go forever because your business is going to change and have to pivot and stuff like that, many companies want to still have a lot of goodwill with those workers that they're letting go, and so they often have some outplacement work that they invest in, and recruiters can in some cases alter and pivot their skills to be very good at helping folks leaving the company find permanent work elsewhere. So I can think of, half a dozen different kinds of ways to adapt, but I do think at the base of it is, what is our business about? Where do we want to go with our business? And do we really understand the skill sets of the people that we have that work for us?
Can I just jump on something that Gerry, something you jumped out there was the word adapt. And I want to draw something that Gerry, you mentioned this morning, which is a brilliant idea, and data will show us if it's required. I've shared that with some of the data that we've seen as a company, our volume or accept rates hasn't gone down. Now, when this first happened, I was actually asking a whole lot of people, were they seeing different sentiment in candidates? With the uncertainty, were candidates not wanting to move forward and look at another company? My team said no, but things were still moving forward. There was different pockets of executive because they were pulled into COVID conversations. But up until this point, we haven't seen a lot of decline rates. But on a call this morning, it come out that some industries are. Gerry made a great point this morning. One of the calls, the person said that a candidate is not going to move forward because of everything that's going on. And Gerry, do you want to share what the suggestion that you made about the family members?
Oh, I have no idea what you think is a good suggestion. But I always enjoy it since I'm going to have a comment anyway. I basically said that we're in a different kind of world in how we're communicating now with candidates, that we're taking all the way through the final decision using virtual tools. Whereas in the past, we usually cut off those virtual tools and then had a lot of face-to-face activity where people wandered around our companies or parts of our companies, et cetera, and they picked up a lot of things. And I think we need to better understand the decision process, not just for us, because we're spending all this time trying to figure out how we change our decision process to select people using just virtual tools. Well, you know what? It seems to me that many candidates are struggling also with how they make the decision to come with another company. And part of it might be that they don't get the chance to meet all the people they would ordinarily meet if they just showed up. So, and they have significant others who are very concerned potentially about where they might end up at some point. And that could be parents of kids who are fresh outs from college. It could be the spouse of or the significant other of someone who has experience and is thinking about taking a job in a place that could be a hot spot a month from now. And even though they'll be working virtually for some period of time, eventually they'll have to spend a lot more time in those places. And so we need to be able to engage around some of that. I think that's what you were referring to.
Yeah, adapting. So maybe it's not just the conversation with the candidate, it's the conversation with the hiring manager, the candidate, and their significant other. You know,
Right.
I could have my wife sitting here to make them feel okay with the scenario. So I think it really sort of jumped out at me, the word adapt. I think there's so many great ideas that are floating out right now.
I think what hits me too is that I spent all this time online with you. You've now offered me this job for your company, and now I'm going to go spend time with a person who I'm going to ask to help me make the decision, who knows nothing about this company, nothing about you as an individual, but is operating on their own fear of what this pandemic means, et cetera. And that's why we have this reluctance. Obviously, we also need to be very agile in terms of not requiring someone to suddenly give 2 weeks notice and show up somewhere, virtually or not. We need to be a lot more agile about saying, when would you like to start, especially if it's not critical to the success of the company right now.
Which broaches the point of starting to track your data of your declines. You know, do we need to go and add another decline reason in your ATS that's called COVID? Because people aren't declining because they're staying with their company or a better offer. They may just be scared to make the decision because of the environment we're in right now. Well, if we see that increasing, we can look at other ways of treating it.
It's clearly how we transparently tell our own employees who are working for us what the story is going forward. Because if they fear that our company might not make it long term, they're going to be a lot more likely to jump ship.
Yep.
All right. Atta, is there anything you would like to add on this subject, or should I move on to the next question? Oh, I think you're muted. You're muted still. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, so I'd like to make a very brief comment here. Definitely love Gerry's comment about outplacement work. And I can say from personal experience, our recruiters, talent acquisition folks managed to help one of our former colleagues find a job yesterday. And that was a great sign for us internally, and we very positive experience for everyone around that we were able to do that. And the second point that I want to come back to that Gerry was talking about is the personal touch. And I think it accomplishes multiple things. For one thing, I do worry about a lot of the single person households out there. And if you look at a lot of jail systems around the world nowadays, if they want to punish someone, they put them in solitary confinement. And now, essentially, like, we have a huge portion of society that are in solitary confinement.
Yeah.
And I think the human psyche isn't built for that. We're social animals, and we need to be in groups, etc. And having folks from the talent acquisition team reach out to individuals one-on-one and have conversations with them and loop that back into asking them, how do you want to be helpful to the company right now? What are some of the ideas that you have? What are some of the skill sets and interests you have? And letting them come up with those ideas and doing that as a one-on-one conversation, I think not only is healthy for everyone and good for everyone and good for the company long-term, because you've kind of like helped your employees when they need it the most, but I think it also yields better results for the company, where through those one-on-one conversations, you can do better brainstorming around what are the company needs now or once we come out of this whole like COVID-19 situation versus what are some of the skills that you can bring to the table. And I think that's just the additional point I wanted to add to that conversation.
Okay, so on to the next question then, which is, how can recruitment and TA specialists become recession-proof? Like, how can they make sure that they achieve such a strategic role inside the organization that they shouldn't be afraid of times like these? And I'm gonna ask this first to Gerry.
Well, I'll be brief. It's not going to be an easy issue. It's going to be a long-term issue in terms of the skill sets of recruiters and recruiting leaders getting to the point where they become a little bit more expert in what the marketplace looks like, not only today, but tomorrow. Understand and are curious enough to understand enough of the business that they're in to be able to push back to hiring managers and offer a different view of the success of the business through the window that they look through. There are folks who are order takers, and there are folks that that help consult with the folks that they're trying to help. And the skill sets are different. And you see that at different levels in terms of recruiting. But as TA leaders certainly get to the point where they're dealing with larger systems, hiring a lot of people, they clearly are developing those kinds of skills and have a need to step up. If they don't, I don't think that they're going to be recession proof at all. And if they do step up, they take the same risks that any business leader would take in having a point of view, understanding a vision of where the company can and should go. And sometimes that works out and sometimes that doesn't. But long term, it's supportive of that individual's career to be in that position. And to me, that's the only way to become recession proof.
Okay. Interesting that you also mentioned your number one rule while talking about this, the step up, correct? That's the number one, I think.
I think all of us at some stage in life decide that we know what doing the right thing looks like, and can overcome the fear of how that's going to be reacted to, and we develop skills to be able to articulate that a little bit better, so it's more constructive than confrontive, and hopefully that serves us well.
Very well. I'm gonna ask the same question to Atta then, if he has an opinion about this. So how can recruiters and TA specialists become recession-proof?
Sure. Be helpful to your organizations and folks there. Understand how you can be helpful. And if it requires a new way to be helpful, don't try to resist learning that new skill set or the new way you can be helpful in. Step right into the cold shower, jumping with both feet, whichever analogy you prefer, and embrace that change. Gerry, you stole one of my points because I had also written here, don't be order takers that just execute tasks. That be helpful thought partners to your organization that help them understand how they can drive results forward. I think this goes as a broader point on how the role of talent acquisition is changing, which is particularly important right now in this environment. I'll give you an example of that. One of our clients out to me and they said, well, Atta, I need, and this is before COVID-19, I need a VP of store operations from Starbucks. I was like, okay, so why do you need a VP of store ops from Starbucks? Well, we're going to be expanding our retail footprint very quickly. Okay, so why a person from Starbucks? Well, if they've been at Starbucks, they've been expanding really quickly, and we could use that skill set. Like, okay, well, what problem do you guys typically face when you're expanding got to solve that key bottleneck this person is solving for you. And his response to me was, well, typically the biggest problem we face is getting foot traffic in the door. Once we get foot traffic in the door, our sales reps are really good at converting those folks into recurring customers. And after saying that, it's like, well, you know what, actually, someone who's done this at Starbucks is probably not the right person because they're not really focused on getting foot traffic in the door. They rely on the brand name to do that. VP of Props at Starbucks is more focused on how to optimize for throughput during peak hours and a lot of other issues, but not foot traffic. I was like, yeah, you know what, actually, let's focus on finding someone who's expanded a retailer that didn't have a strong brand. They had to focus on getting their foot traffic. By kind of like asking these thoughtful questions to various business leaders, you can position yourself as a thought partner that helps to solve business issues as opposed to an order taker that just executes tasks.
Mm-hmm. A note for later, your audio is a little patchy, so we might check if it works better perhaps without the mic. Sorry guys for the technical side note. I'm gonna move on to Brad and ask the same thing. So how do you think that talent acquisition and recruiters can become recession proof?
I look at it a little bit differently, and I look at it from a process perspective, and I look at it from an individual. If you're a full lifecycle recruiter, you have a lot of steps that you have to do. If you're a recruiter that has sourcing support, you have different things to do. So it really depends on the role that you're in. But the end goal and the term that's been thrown around over the last couple of years, and you can say one side of it is the order taker, the other side of it is the talent advisor. I don't think there's a lot of talent advisors out there unless they've got a lot of the tools that they have to be able to do that. So now break that down into what would you have to do. One of the things I still see us as a recruiting body, a recruiting industry, recruiters struggle with is recruiters being marketers. So if you are an end-to-end recruiter, you just don't have to screen someone. You have to be really well versed at how do you attract the talent? How do you market to that talent? That is a new skill set that there's definitely things out there to learn. Then when you bring them in, you start to think about the sourcing, and then that sourcing aspect links back into the attraction as well. So for me, the way to become future-proof is become really great at every part of the process. And when you do that, the end goal that the hiring manager is going to see is someone that brings absolutely great talent. They are an advisor. Things like LinkedIn Insights and leveraging data to have a different dialogue with a hiring manager about what the talent is available and where it's available. Those are the things that I think people can do now is really take a hard look inside as what do you enjoy doing? What do you not enjoy doing? And maybe those things you don't enjoy doing is because you're not an expert at it yet. Start tackling those things. At the moment, what warms my heart is to see so many vendors out there providing resources to people. Whether it be the Johnny Campbell and Social Talent, the Cornerstone on-demand guys, LinkedIn, everybody out there is providing resources. Literally not a day goes past where I don't see another email with a URL of here's a resource page. It doesn't take much to go out there and look for that and then pick the area that you want to pick. If you can pick an hour a day to go and improve your skills, you'll become that talent advisor at the other end. And then your business will be looking at that saying, we do not want to get rid of this recruiting team. Like you take that off the table. And again, depending on the industry, but that's how I look at how do we become future-proof is to become really good at them. And there's so many resources available, more so today, but even just Facebook. There are so many groups that have great subject matter experts that you can throw a question out and there'll be 5 responses. So I think it comes back for me as stopping, sitting back and being really critical and saying, okay, what can I do about making those things better in my life?
Yeah.
The only thing I would add to that, Brad, because I think you touched on it, but I see them as a little bit separate, is one is how the individual is is becoming more knowledgeable about what's going on. But the other thing that you talked about is being more outward focused than inward. There are an awful lot of recruiters who have their heads down, doing a good job within the framework of their company, but they never look up and see what's going on outside there. Begin to talk to their peers, pay attention to how other folks are doing some of the same kinds of things so that they can learn new approaches, new techniques, etc. And then as they develop that outward approach, they start wanting to share that as well. And now they become fully engaged, not only within their company, but within our profession as a recruiter. And I think that changes the game for them in terms of being able to go find work almost anywhere in a very short period of time.
Oh, you're on mute. There you go. No, you're back again.
Now we can hear you.
I wanted to ask Atta if you had any additional comments on this.
On this topic, thank you.
Okay. One note for the audience. Yeah, I forgot to say it perhaps at the beginning of the webinar. At the end of this, other than the frequently asked question part of the interview, the webinar recording is going to be sent to you via email. So don't worry. If you want to share it with people or so on, you're going to be able to do so. You're going to have a link. I'm going to move on to the next question now, which is, what would you want to see change after this recession? And I'm going to ask
Atta. Sorry, it was a little bit choppy here, just so I heard your question correctly. What do I see at the end of this when the whole COVID-19 situation is over?
What would you want to see change after the recession?
What would I want to see change? It's a very thoughtful question. Can I come back to that?
No problem. We can move on to the next one. And then when you have your opinion on this one, we can come back, or we can move on to another guest if they have an answer ready. And if so, raise a hand so we can show you.
Oh, we always have answers.
We always have something to say. For me, the bigger thing for humanity is there's a lot more compassion in the world. That's what I want to see out of this at the end of this, that we continue the compassion that has been really globally right now. And I think as recruiting practitioners, we can take that energy back out there. When I think about what would I like to see changed in the industry, or even the way businesses think about this, as I coined the term that is being used by a lot of the big consulting firms, is the future of work. The future of work is going to change. You know, companies today have not wanted to embrace virtual, and now that's been forced upon them. A lot of companies have been saying we have to have everything face to face. I think the future of work and that body of work that's been done by a number of the big firms out there, I think is going to change the way we do business. I think companies that have not traditionally had a remote workforce are going to realize that whilst it's difficult at the beginning, there's a lot of productivity at the end. So I think we may start to see some business model changes with companies that now opens up a lot more opportunities for people that may not, like right now, be living in the Bay Area, but are remote. There's some great talent that doesn't happen to sit in the Bay Area, but there's some great talent that lives somewhere else because of the ridiculous costs of the Bay Area, as an example. So I'm hoping that we start to see differences when it comes to industries, the way businesses look at talent and where the talent is. You know, we say that all the time. We'll go where the talent is. They shouldn't come to where we are. That's a mental shift that a lot of companies need to go through. And I think this is going to force that. It's also going to force the change when you start looking at the different demographics and the different generations more than ever. So that's sort of my 2 cents of a couple of things I'd like to see changed.
Yeah, I would add to that. I use a different term, but it probably means a lot of the same kinds of things that Brad is talking about. but I'm kind of obsessive with this issue around community. And I think a lot of companies have begun thinking about what that really means in relation to increasing engagement, belonging, a sense of belonging, and a variety of other kinds of things within corporations, and whether or not that has a link to higher performance. And so there's a lot of conversation around that. I have a strong interest in that. And one of the pieces of that is that it requires a different style of leadership. And the closest that I see in terms of the writings that are out there is servant leadership. And so I made a comment actually not long ago on LinkedIn saying that at the end of all of this, I would hope that many more of our CEOs and C-level executives will be studying a little bit more about servant leadership as the means for managing a new style of workforce. And if they're not able to really understand and look in the mirror and see some of themselves in that, that they should move on.
Yeah. And can I just add one thing to that? As a broader point, I guess what I would like to see is a little bit less transactional and more partnership view on the economy and how businesses are forming partnerships with vendors, but also as the gig economy is expanding and more of the folks who are kind of like a one person or a few person company enter into that gig economy, that they are seen as kind of like more partners and less as transactional vendors. And we're seeing the effects of that kind of like unraveling in front of us right now, how that kind of like risk has been shifted from a business to a vendor. And it's not just for small vendors, but even if you look at it in the hospital system in the US, I believe Paul Levy had an article about this, where a lot of the risk has been shifted from insurance companies to hospitals, where they are bearing a lot of that cost right now for the COVID-19 situation, because their reimbursement plans were set on doing a lot of elective procedures, and that's where they would get a lot of the revenues. And now they are not incentivized to take care of COVID-19 patients. In fact, a lot of hospitals are going to be in financial distress after this, even if their number of patients went up. And how that kind of like risk burden is shifted between various companies, I would really like to see a more of a partnership approach to that, to account for scenarios where both parties would benefit from taking part of that risk and not one party alone is carrying that risk.
All right. Now we have a super quick last question before we move on to the queries that the audience posed us. So in a couple of words, what advice would you be giving individuals who are recruiters right now? Is there a specific skill they should develop? Is there a tool they should use? I'm going to start with Gerry.
Well, I won't pass on it. but my advice to recruiters would be to spend at least a part of their day looking at how they can help others who may, because most of the recruiters out there are pretty good at what they need to be able to work collaboratively, not only internally, but externally, to see what they can do to be helpful in building pipelines and engaging their peers and being aware of who's hiring, who isn't hiring from that perspective. There's a lot of information. It's changing very rapidly. So dedicating a piece of your time to that, I think, is going to be a key issue.
Okay. Any other of you two who has an opinion on this?
Yeah, I would say in
what Gerry said perfectly.
In 2 words, I would say upskill and reskill. If you want to position yourself and you think that's kind of like you can do other things as well. When it comes to kind of like upskilling, reskilling, start with hard skills is my personal advice to friends and family, because in an economic environment like this, I think hard skills are going to be valued more than soft skills. Unfortunately, I think that that's going to be the reality. And the hard skills that are high in demand and are going to remain high in demand are specific programming languages, analytics skill sets, but also a lot of vocational training programs out there that are helping people upskill and reskill for vocational programs that they can get on and get a job pretty much right away.
Very well, Brad.
I'm good.
Okay. So I'm going to move on to the audience questions that were asked so far, and I see that we have two. So the first one is, in my company, they say to keep in touch with the potential candidates, even if there is a hiring freeze. Does that make no sense to me, or is it? That makes no sense to me, or is it? Sorry.
I would say now is the time to lean in and communicate with people, even if you don't have a job today. You may have a job in a month's time. They'll remember that they went into a black hole and never heard from you again. That comes back to candidate experience. So I'd flip that around and say now is the time you want to be communicating, even if you don't have positions, because as soon as your jobs open up, you now have a talent pool that you already know. And quite frankly, if you have an environment where you can convince managers to keep having interviews in preparation for that hiring decision, then it's a different conversation with the candidate. You're great. We want to hire you. As soon as this position opens up again, you're in. So I'd flip that one around.
Okay. Atta, Gerry, is there anything you want to add super quickly?
I agree with exactly what Brad said. When I was a recruiter in the days of the dinosaurs, I have to tell you that I believed very passionately that everybody who expressed an interest in a job was my responsibility to communicate with, and not just the ones that ended up getting hired. And the value of that is really a very long-term value. But I do think that's the difference between a transactional and technician point of view to recruiting at a very different level.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, do you have an advice for freelancers, since most of them are now losing their projects? Who wants to start? If you have any, otherwise there is an extra question to be asked.
Yeah, I have a couple of points. So I guess the first point for me is the whole point around upskill and reskilling. If I were a freelancer, I'd be looking at the skill sets that are still in demand in this environment. I'd also be looking at courses and certifications, etc., that are on the shorter time frame. There are plenty of courses out there that are in the 4 to 8 week time frame. If you can kind of like afford to take kind of like a longer course, like go and take a 2-year program or something like that, sure. But if you can, start with a shorter program. The other thing is, don't give up. In an environment like this, you're going to hear a ton of no's. But when you're looking at the data from LinkedIn showed that hiring in Los Angeles for March was down with 15%, 15. That means that 85% of the economy is still humming in March. Now, I don't have the numbers for April yet, but still 85% of the jobs that people were intending to hire for in March, they still did hire. So don't be discouraged. Like I was saying, we helped a colleague find a job yesterday. There are people that are still finding jobs, and you just have to kind of like up your efforts and reach out to more people and apply for more positions. But there are still jobs out there. Don't give up.
And I think that creative side of that is there too. And I'll give one example. I had a note from one of the recruiting leaders last week about what was going on in New York State, where the governor basically hired a staffing firm to call everyone who had a license in New York State as a nurse, but was in other states. And they've ended up with something like 20,000 volunteers But that was not work that was out there before. And I will tell you that just about every state probably does have a database of licensed nurses. And I would suspect that most of the hospital systems in most of those states would love for someone, to be able to do something with that. So there's got to be opportunity in all of this. And so the issue about persistence and being creative, I think, is going to be important here.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to wrap it up because one of our guests has to leave. I'm going to thank all of you for showing up and watching this interview, but also to our 3 wonderful guests for the beautiful conversation we just had. I found it very interesting and insightful.
Thanks for having us.
Not a problem. Hopefully there's going to be.
Stay safe.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.